In this video, we're gonna be building a simple Node.js Express API, and we're gonna be deploying it on Kubernetes cluster. So I have this empty project with me. Here, I'm gonna be creating an Express.js API. So let's just start. Firstly, what I'm gonna be doing, I'm gonna be running this command npm init-y. So it will just initialize my folder with package.json. So it will initialize my folder with package.json. Next, I'm gonna be creating a file. You can create any file. I'm going to be creating a main.js. So you can name it anything, app.js, index.js, main.js, or whatever you want. In here, I'm going to be building a Express app. For that, I will be installing Express first. So we will run this command npm install Express. Now, Express is a web framework for Node.js. It provides simple methods to create an HTTP server. So const express require express. Next, I'm going to be creating an app object by calling express method here. Next, we just define a port as well on which our application would be running. So I'm going to be creating port 8080. Next, let's just run our application. So we can use this listen method, and we will pass the port and a callback function. Now, just type here server running on port. Now this will start a simple HTTP server on a port 8080. Now next is let's just create a route as well to handle our HTTP request. So I will create app.get and slash, and let's just pass a callback function, request response. Now this will return a status of 200 along with a JSON response with message success. Now let's just test our API. So let's just run node main.js. I guess this port is already used somehow. Just change this port to 8090 instead. And node main.js. Now you see that our application is running on port 8090. If we want to test the API, what we can do, we can use curl command, http localhost :8090, and we get this message success. So our API is successfully running on port 8090. Next is what we're going to be doing. I'm going to be creating a Docker image out of this application. So let's just create a Docker file first. So Docker file is required to create a Docker image. It just contains all the commands that are needed to build up the image. I have this predefined image commands with me. I'm going to be copying this. I'll be pasting. Now, to run this, to build this Docker image, make sure that you have Docker installed on your system. If you're running, if you're using Mac or Windows, you can use Docker Desktop. If you're using Ubuntu, you can install Docker by going to the official Docker. Next is, let's just build this image. So I will use this Docker build command. Let me just clear the screen. And let me just exit from this HTTP port as well. Now let's just run this Docker build, and I'm going to be passing this -t, which is a tag, and we're going to be naming our application. We have to pass the name for our image, so app express and put dot. Now it will create a Docker image for our application. Now the Docker image is just a composition of all the files that are required to run our application, and it just like provide a feel of an operating system, and we can just run that Docker image, which will create a Docker container for us, and we can just pass HTTP request to it. Now our Docker image is created. Now let's just run this Docker images command. You see that this app express is just created 14 seconds ago. Now, if I want to run this Docker image, all we have to do is run this Docker run and pass the port, and then we have to map the port of uh, of our operating system or of our system to the port on which our application is running. So if you see in main.js, we have port 8090. So our application would be running at port 8090 inside the Docker container. Now, if we want to map it to our system's port, we have to give the port whatever the port we want. So let's just say give 8090 only, and this is our system's port, and this is the port on which our application is running inside the Docker container. And let's just uh, give the image name as well. Like, I guess I forgot the image name. So let's just see again, Docker images, it is app express. Okay, so now our server is running on port 8090. And if we want to test it again, we can just run curl http localhost 8090. So yeah, our application is running and we are getting messages success. Now the first part is over. Next is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be creating a cloud VPS server, and we will be creating a Kubernetes cluster on it. And I'm going to be walk you through all the steps that I'm going to be using to create a simple Kubernetes cluster. So we're going to be using this micro K8, which is a lightweight Kubernetes, and it is easily deployable, right? If you want, you can use pre-built services as well, like EKS from AWS or from Azure or whatever. But we're going to be building everything from scratch. So I'm going to be using this microcare. So for that, what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be creating a simple VPS. I'm going to be using DigitalOcean. I already have an account on DigitalOcean. So here, what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be creating a simple droplet. And region, I'm going to be selecting Bangalore. And for basic, I will be going with the regular disk with 8 GB RAM. So yeah, just click on create droplet. Everything else seems fine. So just click on create droplet. So what it will do, it will create a droplet. So droplet basically are VPS, or in AWS you can call them EC2, or it just are cloud instances. So it will take a bit of time. So let's just resume this video once the droplet is created. So now the droplet has been created and it has provided us this public IP. So now what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be logging in to my VPS server using SSH. So I have already have configured the private and public key. You can, if you are creating it, you might it might ask you for creating the username and password as well, or you can create a public and private key as well. So this is child node, and then the username for DigitalOcean server is always root, and then @ and this is my public IP. I'll be pasting it here. Yeah. So next is yes. Okay, so now we are inside our VPS server. Next is we're going to be following this documentation here, right? So just click on Linux. So next is we're going to be copying this command. So it will install the micro K8 on our Ubuntu system. It will take a bit of time, and I guess it's done. Okay, so depending on whether you are using Windows or Mac OS or whatever, you can easily install micro K8. So yeah, I think it is installed. Now, if you want to check whether it is running or not, you can just use this particular status ready, but it sometimes hangs up. what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be using this command micro k8 kubectl get all. Okay, so our Kubernetes server is running. Okay, Kubernetes cluster is running actually, and we have the service Kubernetes already running in here. So this kubectl is basically is a command line tool for Kubernetes, which you can use to run and check, deploy services, deploy uh, replica sets or create pods and get the status of Kubernetes, whatever is happening in your Kubernetes cluster. You can use this kubectl command to check each and everything in your what's going on with your Kubernetes cluster. So what I'm going to be doing next is I'm going to be creating an alias for my micro k8. So right now, if I have to run this micro k8 kubectl for each and every command. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be uh, creating an alias for it. So I will be just going to sudo nano slash dot dash rc. In here, I would be creating an alias for my kubectl command. So alias kubectl equals to, let me just see this command. I guess I'm forgetting. Okay, so yeah, micro k. Let me just copy this. Okay. And we have to reload it, otherwise we have to relog in to see the effects. So I will run this command source dash rc. Okay, so now I think we are good to go. So if I type kubectl get all, yeah, okay, so our Kubernetes is working fine. Next is what we're going to be doing is we will be enabling the registry for our Kubernetes. So we're going to be having our Docker container, or let's say Docker image, which we will be pushing it into the local registry of micro k8. And from there, we're going to be uh, pulling it out and using it in our Kubernetes pod. Okay. So let's just go on this documentation here, and let's enable the registry. Okay, so it's very simple here. We have to type just one command, and that's it. Okay, so now we are done with the micro cage setup. Next is what we're going to be doing is we will be configuring some YAML files for our Kubernetes deployment for our application. Okay. So let's just create a file called Kubernetes deployment.yaml. I already have the deployment file with me. Just gonna be copying pasting in here. Okay. So let me just quickly walk through what we are doing here. So we are creating a replica set. So replica set. So how Kubernetes works is like we have the lowest entity, that is pod. Okay, so pod is just, you can say, a Docker container running in a separate environment. Then we have the replica set. So replica set is kind of, we can just manage the multiple pods, or we can just say that okay, that these much pods we need in Kubernetes. So Kubernetes will make sure that whatever the pods we want, right, or whatever the replicas of our pods we want, it will, at a time, it will always be available. Next is, right, all these API version is apps given, right? So like Kubernetes API gives us this versions that we have to follow. And second is a kind, which is replica set. And these are some metadata. The important part here is this, in the spec, we have selector, then we have this match labels, which is web app. So this web app is very important. This match label is very important for our service to figure out this web app. So we're going to be running our Kubernetes cluster in which a pod is running for our application. And then we have to create a service to expose this pod or expose the port of this pod to our external network such that we can visit on it. Next is we have the service here. And if you see here, we have the selector, which is app, web app, which should be same as this particular here. This is whatever the match labels we have in here. They should be same. Otherwise, our service won't be able to locate our pod, which is working here. Next is the type is node port. So the node port, there are different kinds of services you can create. You can create cluster IP or node port or load balancer, right? Right now we are dealing with only node port. So what node port will do? Node port will expose our this particular application or particular port on this port that we have mentioned here on this node port. And then we have another kind of service which is known as cluster IP, which actually runs inside the cluster only, and you are able to access the service only inside your Kubernetes cluster. But if you want to expose your service or your API to the external environment as well, you have to use the node port. So now our deployment is ready as well. In here, we will just change it to 8090 because if you see, we have this main.js and our application is actually running on 8090. And in here also, whatever the port, this node port will map to whatever the port on which the pod is running. Here we also have to change it to 8090. Now our Kubernetes deployment is fine. Next is we have to push this code to our VPS. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be creating a Git repository, which will be available in the video description as well. And then we will just clone this repository in our VPS server. Okay, so this is our repository, which we're going to be cloning into our VPS. So I'm going to be going here. We just type this git clone. And okay, so now we are good to go, right? Next is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be creating a Docker image for our application, and we're going to be pushing it into microcreate repository. So we have to follow this documentation, and it is pretty much very important to just mention this localhost colon 32,000 along with the name of your image, because this particular port 32,000 is the port on which the microcreate local repository is running. Okay, so let's just copy this command and we will just change this name to our Express app. So let's just go here and let's just change this name my nginx to Express app. And okay, so now it is complaining that the command Docker is not found. So I guess we have to install the Docker as well. So to install Docker, just run command. We don't need sudo. I already have the access. Sudo snap install Docker. It will install the latest Docker on the Ubuntu system. Okay, so now we are good to go. Now let's just run this command again. Okay, so I think we have to go inside the repository that we just cloned. So cd node, let's run this command again. Okay, so now it will just take a bit of time to just create the image for us. Okay, so the Docker image is ready. Now it's time to push it into the local repository of microcreate. Before that, let's tag it. So Docker images, and if you see, this is the ID we have. Just run this command, Docker tag, and image ID, and then we have the Express app. So if I type Docker images, Express app, yeah, we have, I think I have tagged it wrongly. Okay, so Docker images, we have this. Okay, so let's just rebuild the image. That would be the better choice. So let's run this docker build command again. And this time we just call it app only. Okay, so now it's done. And docker images. And just run this docker tag command again. And here it would be app. And let's just change this image ID as well. Okay, now we are good to go. Next, this is the last command. We have to push it into the local Docker repository. And this would be /app. Okay, so it is just pushing it into the local repository. Okay, so now it is pushed into the local repository. Next, what we're going to be doing, we're going to be modifying our Kubernetes YAML file. So nano, and in place of image here, we will just put the name of the image that we just pushed into our local repository, that is localhost 32,000 app :registry. Okay. Just exit and save the file. Now we have to run one final command, that is kubectl apply -f and kubernetes deployment.yaml. Okay, so you will see this kind of feedback created and service express app created. If we want to see the status as well, you can just type kubectl get all. So right now it is giving us container creating, but I just run it again. Container creating. Okay, if you see that it is showing as running here, and our service express app has also been created. Now let's see that if we can access our APIs from our browser. So this is our API. This is our IP, and let's type it. And if I go to the Kubernetes deployment.yaml, we have this 30,080 port. Let's put it here. Okay, so now if you see, our API is running fine here, right? So we have successfully created an Express API. We deployed it on Kubernetes cluster on an Ubuntu server. So yeah, that's all right. Thank you. Thanks for watching the video.